Hey, what's up, Lightbolt Joe here. Today we are going to discuss the 1994 action-adventure thriller film Speed. This stars Sandra Bullock, Keanu Reeves, Jeff Daniels, a bunch of other people are in this. This is very interesting. I've never seen the whole thing from start to finish until last night, technically, with my folks. And it's such a simple plot, and it's just so awesome. It's just so awesome how well it's done and how the story progresses, and that no parts are cheesy or stupid, and you're like, the plot of the story is literally there's a bomb on a bus, and if the bus goes below 50 miles per hour, it's going to explode. What happens, right? This is through the streets of Los Angeles. But how do you start that story? And how do you end that story? Does the bus is going to explode because eventually it's going to run out of gas, logically, but what happens in between that? So we start out with Jeff Daniels' character and Keanu Reeves' character playing two LAPD officers, and they are going into this elevator shaft of this skyscraper to help rescue these 13 people that are trapped in an elevator because there's a bomber who rigged, various explosives to drop the original box, and then there's bombs attached to the emergency brakes to then go off. So it's a matter of how do you save these people, right? Chaos ensues, explosion, practical effect this, practical effect that. Very cool within the practical effects aspect. And so they are saved. The bomber is not happy about that. He then straps a bomb to himself to then, kidnap Jeff Daniels' character, and then there's a showdown, and then it's presumed that he explodes himself in a parking lot. Presumed. But he's not. But of course, the body could never be found because it's full C4 strapped to him. So then he would just be blown to billions of pieces. So, thinking he's dead, the cops get their awards, and then something happens, and the bus explodes, and then Keanu happens to be there. Keanu's character of Jack happens to be there, and so he then gets a phone call on the street, runs to a payphone. It's the bomber, stating that there's another bomb on a bus at this place. If I don't get my $3 million, and, it's going to explode, whether I detonate it or whether it, goes below 50. So tracking it down, and Sandra Bullock's character of Annie happens to be on this bus along with a bunch of other people trying to get to work or wherever, in Los Angeles. And so street scenes and suburb scenes and freeway scenes and all of this absolute chaos. Annie then driving a bus after the bus driver is shot by one of the patrons of the bus inadvertently. It's just so interesting watching all of the different aspects of the plot come together, all the different practicality of it. How do you make a deal with someone while having to drive, while having to destroy property? And then eventually, last third of the film basically takes place on an airstrip, so that way the bus can just continuously go around and around until eventually it runs out. Or, they play the trick to get everybody off the bus while looping a video, because nothing's digital, so it has to be taped. And it's very interesting watching all this feed, having the bomber watching the news feed, getting all the different interactions, being able to call Jack on his cell phone to say, hey, I just saw this, don't do that, or else I'm going to press this button, kind of a thing. And then the very, very, very last part of the film takes place on a subway going through the streets of Los Angeles. And how do you derail that after you kill the actual, bomber without exploding things, right? It's so interesting, starting in an elevator shaft, going to a bus, then going to a subway. Very interesting how it all comes together and how it all works together. It all works so well, and this is still well received all these years later. And it's interesting because it did spawn a sequel, 97 sequel Speed 2, which takes place on a cruise ship. Sandra Bullock's character of Annie comes back, but Keanu doesn't come back because he didn't like the script. And the second film was torn to shreds via the box office, via critics. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm very curious how that works story-wise, continuing the character of Annie, continuing the character development. How long has it been since she wound up then dating Jack at the end, to then, if Jack's not in the sequel. But it's really cool. It's really cool seeing it all of these years later in regards to a practical effect aspect. I said this a few times within movies of the 80s and 90s and 70s films, within a blockbuster aspect. Practical effect is very important because it gives a sense of realism. When you use CGI to do certain things, it kind of negates the realism. It depends on what CGI, of course, and it depends on what you're trying to do. But in 1994, they used real explosions, right? There's explosive this, explosive that. Nowadays, you would have a CGI explosive, a CGI explosive. So it's very rare to have an actual practical effect thrown in versus CGI. So like Jurassic World Dominion, we just talked about recently. Very cool within the practical effect because there was a lot of animatronic dinosaurs compared to the other sequel films. Majority were CG, not practical. So it's different. It gives a different sense of authenticity, a different sense of real. And it's interesting I keep saying that and I'm comparing it to Jurassic because there's a lot of different toy lines of Jurassic which are called real feel, where it has an actual textured kind of rubbered kind of skin feel to the actual dinosaur toy versus just a standard hard plastic. I don't have a dinosaur figure near me, but I have my Jurassic figures on the side and up on the shelf over there. So real. That's a great explanation. That's a great comparison. That hard plastic feel is more of that CGI aspect. The real feel aspect of the toy is that authentic, grit, practical effect aspect. This film, the 1994 Speed film, had that practical effect aspect, that real feel to it. So I like it. I like that comparison. That was a good comparison. Great film. Yeah, on to the next review. Mucho mahalo.